Disney's first full-length animated feature wasn't just a fairy tale. It was a cultural earthquake. Kids saw magic, dwarfs, and a happy ending. But adults? They noticed something darker, stranger, and far more complicated hiding beneath the cheerful songs. Have you ever wondered why this story feels both enchanting and unsettling? Stick around because once you look closely, you'll never see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs the same way again. Let's start with a few truths you probably missed. The Queen's horrifying death. At first glance, the Queen's downfall looks like the usual bad guy gets what's coming moment. But watch closely, and you'll see just how brutal it really is. She doesn't simply vanish. She dies in a storm of cinematic violence. Lightning strikes the cliff where she clings. The rock crumbles beneath her, and she falls into the abyss while boulders crash down. As if that's not enough, vultures circle above, waiting to feast. Disney didn't just give her an ending, they gave her one of the most terrifying exits in animation history. Adults notice the raw finality of it. There's no magical undoing, no second chance, just the merciless hand of fate. For children, it's a quick resolution. For grown-ups, it's a chilling reminder of mortality and karma rolled into one. The fact that Disney put this level of horror into a movie marketed as family-friendly shows how unflinching early animation could be. It isn't simply a villain being stopped. It's a statement about unchecked vanity, power, and ambition, none of which save her in the end. Adults watching today can't help but think, this isn't just a fairy tale punishment. It's a gothic finale worthy of a horror film. Poison apple parallels. Kids see a red apple and think of a simple trick. Eat the fruit. Fall into a cursed sleep. Adults? They see centuries of meaning baked into that one object. The apple has always carried symbolic weight, temptation, forbidden curiosity, the danger of wanting something that looks perfect on the outside but is rotten within. Disney didn't invent this idea, but they amplified it with clever animation. Notice how the apple gleams unnaturally, glowing like it's alive. The Queen's hand trembles with almost obsessive delight as she presents it. For children, it's a creepy fruit. For adults, it's a loaded metaphor for desire, vanity, and danger disguised as beauty. The apple is less a snack and more a weapon dressed in sugar. Even the way Snow White accepts it feels unsettling for grown-ups. She's told to wish on it, to believe in its promise, and then she takes a bite without hesitation. Adults see the dark irony. Innocence mixed with naivety can lead to ruin. The poison apple isn't just a plot device. It's a chilling little package of life lessons about appearances, trust, and how easily danger can be dressed up as charm. Snow White's age gap. Here's something you probably didn't think about. As a child, Snow White's youth. She isn't a grown woman at all. Her design and backstory place her closer to mid-teens, yet she's thrust into situations that look far too adult. Singing about true love, fleeing an assassination attempt, and taking on the role of homemaker to 7 grown men. Adults notice the awkwardness of how her character is framed. In the 1930s, Hollywood was no stranger to smoothing over uncomfortable age dynamics in films. In fact, many female leads were portrayed as far younger than their on-screen partners. The prince who rescues her with a kiss is clearly older and more mature. To a child, this is just romance. To adults, it feels more like a mismatch that hasn't aged well. The unease grows when you realize Snow White's appearance is deliberately childlike. Wide eyes, round cheeks, soft voice. Yet she's placed in situations coded as adult, romance, danger, and sacrifice. It creates a clash that many modern viewers can't ignore. Adults come away thinking, Snow White isn't just a princess in peril. She's a character stuck between childhood innocence and adult responsibility. And the gap makes the story strangely unsettling. The dwarfs' labor. Children see the dwarfs as lovable, quirky minors, but adults quickly pick up on something deeper. These little guys are stuck in endless labor, digging for jewels day after day, without any real sense of reward. Watch the mining scenes closely. They sing and joke, but their work is grueling. They haul massive loads, swing heavy tools, and dig endlessly into the earth. The gems they uncover don't seem to benefit them at all. They're not shown trading, selling, or even enjoying the riches. It's work for work's sake, and that resonates differently with adults who know the grind of real life. In 1937, during the Great Depression, this imagery would have struck audiences hard. The dwarfs represented the working class, tireless, cheerful on the surface, but trapped in a cycle of labor they couldn't escape. Kids saw sparkle. Adults saw commentary. Even their home, cluttered and chaotic, reflects the fatigue of men too exhausted to care after long shifts. Snow White becomes their caretaker, bringing order to their lives not through wealth, but through comfort and domesticity. For adults, it paints a stark picture. All the jewels in the world mean nothing if you're too tired to enjoy them. The huntsman's orders. This might be the darkest moment in the entire film, one that children often don't fully register. The queen doesn't simply ask the huntsman to get rid of Snow White. She demands proof of the deed, specifically her heart in a box. That's not fairy tale mischief. That's cold-blooded murder with a trophy request attached. For kids, it's just a scary order. For adults, it's shocking how graphic and detailed it really is. The very idea of carving out someone's heart and delivering it as proof belongs in a thriller, not a cartoon. And yet Disney didn't shy away. They animated the huntsman's turmoil, his trembling hands, and his desperate decision to defy the queen. Adults notice the complexity of this scene. It isn't just good versus evil, it's moral conflict. The huntsman has to choose between obedience to authority and his conscience. He spares Snow White, but even then, he sacrifices an animal's heart to trick the queen. That detail alone adds another layer of discomfort for grown-ups. This moment proves that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wasn't a soft fantasy. It was willing to dip into raw, unsettling territory, leaving adults stunned that such intensity made it into a children's movie. Fear of female rivalry. As a kid, the queen's jealousy just looks like a villain being mean. But adults recognize how much deeper this theme runs. The queen isn't threatened by Snow White's kindness, or her voice, or even her role as heir. She's threatened solely by looks. Her entire identity is tied to being the fairest of them all. This rivalry isn't about power or politics, it's about beauty standards. The queen sees Snow White's youth and radiance as a direct attack on her worth. It's not a duel of equals, it's a generational clash. Adults can see how this mirrors real-world pressures where women are pitted against each other, judged on appearance alone. The unsettling part? The queen's obsession isn't even rooted in truth. Her mirror, the symbol of judgment, speaks with authority, but it's not infallible. It simply reinforces her paranoia. For adults, this adds a layer of tragedy. The queen's downfall isn't just because she's evil. It's because she buys into a toxic belief system that equates beauty with power. Children see a jealous queen and a beautiful princess. Adults see a story about how society traps women in a cycle of comparison, rivalry, and self-destruction. Snow White doesn't even compete, yet she becomes the target. It's a rivalry that's one-sided, cruel, and eerily familiar. Subtext of grooming roles. When Snow White stumbles upon the dwarf's house, kids laugh at the mess. Adults, though, notice the instant shift. Snow White doesn't just tidy up, she becomes their stand-in mother and maid without hesitation. Think about it. She cooks their meals, washes their clothes, cleans their floors, and tucks them into bed. The dwarfs accept it without question, cheering as if this arrangement is natural. To children, it's playful. To adults, it reflects the 1930s expectation that a woman's highest role was domestic service. The troubling part is how quickly Snow White embraces this role. She doesn't complain, doesn't question, doesn't wonder if it's fair. Her first thought is, if I keep house, maybe they'll let me stay. Adults catch the implication. Her survival hinges on her usefulness as a caretaker, not on her value as a person. For the audience in 1937, this was reinforcing a cultural norm. Today it feels outdated, maybe even unsettling. The dwarfs aren't villains, but their relationship with Snow White highlights a power imbalance. She's not an equal. She's their cleaner and cook. Adults can't help but see the unspoken message. In this story, a woman earns safety by serving. The dwarf's bachelor lifestyle. Kids find the dwarfs hilarious, grumpy, sneezy, messy little characters. But adults notice their cabin is more than just a joke. It's a snapshot of bachelor living taken to the extreme. Dirty dishes piled high, cobwebs in every corner, furniture scuffed and broken. It's not just mess, it's neglect. These men are so consumed by work that their personal lives have fallen apart. Their home looks like a cave because, in a way, they've become half-wild miners with no one to ground them. When Snow White arrives, the contrast is almost shocking. Suddenly, the place shines. Curtains are hung, meals are served, and order is restored. Adults notice how much this dynamic reflects the era's stereotypes. Men work, women clean. The dwarfs are lovable, but the film plays into the idea that without female influence, men descend into chaos. For adults, there's also a bittersweet edge. The dwarfs' laughter and songs disguise a lonely reality. They live in isolation, bound by routine, with no connection to the outside world until Snow White appears. Kids laugh at their antics, but adults see it differently. A group of hardworking men who've let joy slip through the cracks of daily life. Alcohol references. On the surface, the dwarfs' lively songs seem like wholesome fun, but adults catch something else. The mugs they slam down, the way they stagger and holler, the beer steins that clink as they sing. These aren't just cups of water. The imagery is borrowed straight from tavern culture. In the 1930s, alcohol still carried cultural weight after Prohibition. Including it in a family movie wasn't just background, it was normalizing a very adult pastime. Kids see funny singing. Adults see a group of men unwinding after long shifts the same way miners and factory workers did in real life. It also colors their personalities. Dopey's silliness, Grumpy's irritability, even the rowdy singing all take on a new tone when you consider the undertone of drinking. The dwarfs' camaraderie is built not just on work, but on the rituals of relaxation common to adults everywhere. For grown-ups, it's striking how Disney managed to slip this in without making it obvious. Children don't question it. Adults notice the winks toward pub culture and the subtle nod to reality. After labor comes leisure, even if leisure looks like singing off-key with a foamy drink in hand. Unsettling realism in animation. One of the most haunting details in the movie doesn't come from the plot. It comes from the background. Adults notice how disturbingly real some of the animation feels, especially in darker scenes. Take the Queen's transformation into the old hag. The way her body twists, her hands grow gnarled, and her face collapses into wrinkles, it looks grotesquely authentic. Or the vultures circling above her as she scrambles across the cliff. They aren't cartoony birds. They're drawn with predator precision, waiting for her to die. Children watch in awe, but adults feel the discomfort. This wasn't soft fantasy. It was Disney experimenting with gothic realism, pulling imagery from horror and suspense films of the era. That level of detail makes the Queen's fate more terrifying and Snow White's peril more dire. It also set a tone for future animation. Disney wasn't just making cartoons for kids, he was making cinema. The use of shadows, storms, and lifelike detail told adults. This was art that could stand alongside live-action thrillers. For grown-ups, those vultures aren't just background. They're a reminder of death hovering, unblinking, and waiting. The prince's role. As a child, the prince seems like a dream hero, appearing at the beginning, vanishing for most of the story, then showing up to save the day. But adults can't help but notice how oddly thin his role is. He doesn't fight dragons, he doesn't battle the queen, he barely even speaks. He simply shows up at the right moment, sings, and claims the reward. This stands out more when you think about storytelling structure. Snow White goes through trials, the dwarfs risk their lives, the queen conjures storm and sorcery, but the prince, he strolls in at the end to fix everything with a single kiss. Adults recognize this as a classic example of a female-led story being hijacked by a male rescuer. There's also the question of agency. Snow White doesn't choose him in the end. She's unconscious. Their love story is framed as destiny rather than choice. To children, it's a fairy tale conclusion. To adults, it feels unearned, like a romance written in shorthand. This doesn't make the prince malicious, but it makes him symbolic. He's not a character, he's a function. Adults watching today realize that Snow White's real power lies in its villains, its dwarfs, and its heroines' struggles. The prince is more of a decorative bookend than a partner. The queen's obsession with beauty. For kids, the queen is simply vain. For adults, her obsession with being the fairest reveals something much darker. She's a ruler with wealth, power, and control, yet none of it matters to her if she isn't the most beautiful. This fixation reflects an unsettling truth. Her entire value is tied to appearance. She could have ruled kingdoms, built alliances, or sought real legacy. Instead, she pours her time into potions, mirrors, and disguises, all to maintain an illusion of youth. What's more, she doesn't just want to be beautiful, she wants to erase competition. Snow White doesn't seek to overthrow her, yet the queen sees her as a threat simply for existing. Adults see this as a mirror of society's obsession with comparing women, often at their own expense. The tragedy is that the queen is intelligent, resourceful, and determined. She invents potions, crafts disguises, and strategizes her moves. But all of that brilliance is wasted on chasing beauty. Adults can't help but feel the irony. She's one of Disney's most capable characters, destroyed not by weakness, but by vanity, religious undertones. Kids see Snow White kneel by her bed, fold her hands, and whisper a sweet bedtime wish. Adults see something else entirely, an overt reflection of 1930s American culture, where films often included moral lessons framed as childlike faith or virtue. While the movie never names it directly, the imagery is clear. Snow White is angelic, dressed in light colors, and always associated with innocence. The queen, by contrast, lurks in shadows, surrounded by skulls, potions, and storm clouds. Adults notice how this plays into a binary of good and evil, light and dark. The funeral scene also leans heavily into symbolic imagery. Snow White is displayed in a glowing glass coffin, preserved and untouched, almost saint-like. For children, it's just magical. For adults, it's reminiscent of ceremonies that emphasize purity, sacrifice, and virtue as ideals. What's fascinating is how this shaped Disney's brand. Adults see Snow White as not just a fairy tale, but an early example of moral storytelling. It sends the message that virtue leads to reward, while obsession and vanity lead to ruin. Even if you don't dwell on symbolism, the contrasts are impossible to ignore. Domestic idealization. When Snow White cheerfully sings while scrubbing the dwarf's home, kids see whimsy. Adults, however, recognize how tightly this film promotes domestic ideals. Snow White isn't shown as a warrior, a thinker, or a leader. She's shown as a homemaker who finds joy in cleaning, cooking, and caring for others. This makes sense in 1937. During the Great Depression, Hollywood often idealized traditional roles to reassure audiences. A cheerful woman scrubbing floors wasn't just cute, it was propaganda for stability. Adults watching today catch this subtext immediately. The dwarfs don't teach her skills, nor does she ask for training or power. Instead, she proves her worth by tidying their mess and cooking their dinner. The payoff? She earns their protection and companionship. For adults, this raises questions. Did Disney intend for this to be aspirational for young girls? Was Snow White meant to represent a model of obedience and cheerfulness? The answer seems to be yes. What children see as magical cleaning is, for adults, a coded message about gender roles. And while it may feel outdated today, it's an undeniable reminder of how animation reflects the values of its time. The witch's old hag form. Kids are scared when the queen transforms into the old woman. Adults see something even more uncomfortable. A direct link between aging and loss of power. The queen doesn't just disguise herself. She willingly trades beauty for ugliness, power for frailty, and youth for age, all to accomplish her goal. But the implication is harsh. Once she's old, she's automatically seen as grotesque, untrustworthy, and sinister. Her gnarled hands, cracked voice, and hunched frame aren't just a disguise. They're a symbol of how society demonizes age, especially in women. Children may laugh nervously at the hag's crooked teeth, but adults recognize the cruelty behind this depiction. It tells audiences that beauty equals goodness and aging equals decay. The queen herself embodies the paradox. She's terrified of losing her beauty, but to succeed, she embraces the very image she despises. Adults see this as the ultimate irony. Her hatred of aging is so extreme that it becomes her weapon, yet it also leads to her downfall. In the end, the old hag isn't just a disguise. She's a cultural warning. In a world obsessed with youth, growing old isn't just natural, it's seen as monstrous. The terrifying forest sequence. As children, the forest chase feels like a spooky dream. But adults watch it and realize it's one of the most psychologically intense scenes Disney has ever done. When Snow White flees into the woods, the world doesn't just look scary, it becomes alive. Trees grab like claws, shadows morph into monsters, and the ground itself seems to swallow her. This isn't random, it's an animated visualization of a panic attack. Adults who have faced fear or trauma instantly recognize the realism. Shallow breathing, distorted senses, and the feeling that danger lurks everywhere, even when nothing is truly there. Disney turned a simple chase into a cinematic descent into raw human terror. For 1937 audiences, this scene was groundbreaking. Movies rarely showed fear this vividly, let alone in animation. The forest's shifting imagery reflected not only Snow White's terror, but the universal experience of being overwhelmed. Children just saw scary shapes. Adults saw anxiety, paranoia, and the haunting truth that fear can distort reality until it feels inescapable. It's why this sequence lingers long after the songs fade. It doesn't just entertain, it unsettles, leaving adults whispering, "Wow, that was far more intense than I remembered." The dwarfs' personalities. Kids adore the dwarf's silliness. Adults, however, notice something clever. Each dwarf is more than a gag. They're exaggerated archetypes of adult personalities. Grumpy is the hardened cynic, always suspicious and quick to criticize. Doc is the self-important leader who often stumbles under pressure. Dopey is childlike innocence, silent but expressive. Sleepy is the worn-out worker, yawning through exhaustion. Bashful embodies social anxiety, while happy is the eternal optimist. Sneezy? He's the one cursed with uncontrollable quirks, always struggling to keep up. Together, they form a miniature society. Adults recognize coworkers, neighbors, even family members in their traits. Their exaggerated personalities aren't random. They mirror real types people encounter every day. That's why the dwarfs resonate across generations. They aren't fantasy creatures. They're human behavior in caricature form. For kids, they're funny. For adults, they're sharp observations about how different personalities clash, bond, and survive together. Disney didn't just make seven silly characters. He made a study of human nature, disguised as comedy. Romantic consent issues. For decades, the ending seemed like pure fairy tale magic. Snow White revived by a kiss of true love. Children cheer, believing in happily ever after. Adults, however, take a step back and realize she never agreed to it. Snow White is unconscious. The prince kisses her without permission. In 1937, this was considered romantic, an act of destiny, not choice. But adults watching today can't ignore the lack of agency. Snow White's happy ending is decided for her without her voice or consent. It raises uncomfortable questions about storytelling and how love was depicted for decades. This doesn't erase the film's charm, but it adds complexity. Adults can appreciate the animation, the music, and the artistry while also recognizing how social norms have shifted. The kiss isn't just a magical solution, it's a reflection of the time when women's voices were often secondary in stories about their own fates. For grown-ups, the scene is no longer simple. It's layered, romantic in its intent, problematic in its execution, and it forces adults to wonder, how many other classic romances are built on the same shaky foundation? Class divide. Children see a princess in rags and a wicked queen in a castle. Adults notice the deeper commentary about class. Snow White, despite her royal birth, is cast into a life of servitude. She scrubs, cooks, and cleans, while her stepmother sits in luxury, consumed by vanity. The dwarfs, meanwhile, represent the laboring class. They mine gems tirelessly, yet their wealth is meaningless. Their jewels pile up, unused, suggesting exploitation or futility. They work endlessly, while the queen uses wealth and power to oppress. This divide would have hit audiences hard in the 1930s. The Great Depression was in full swing. Millions were out of work, while the wealthy clung to privilege. Snow White reflected that reality without directly saying it. The workers had camaraderie but no riches, while the queen lived in power yet destroyed herself with greed. Adults today catch the echoes. It isn't just a fairy tale. It's a snapshot of economic tension. Those who toil endlessly versus those who sit atop them, wasting resources on vanity. Kids saw dwarfs and castles. Adults see a quiet allegory about inequality that hasn't lost relevance. The Queen's Lab. To a child, the Queen's Dungeon is spooky fun. Bubbling cauldrons, potions, and a creepy staircase. Adults see something much darker. That lab is filled with the iconography of obsession. Skulls lining the shelves, poisons bubbling, cages dangling with trapped animals. It looks less like a witch's lair and more like a torture chamber. Her spellbook doesn't just describe recipes, it demands sacrifices. Deadly herbs, rare ingredients, bones, things no child notices, but adults instantly recognize as sinister. The Queen's laboratory is where her ambition fully curdles into madness. Adults see the detail in her potions and tools, realizing she's not just vain, she's methodical, scientific in her cruelty. Her lair feels closer to an alchemist's workshop or even an early horror movie set, something that belonged in Frankenstein rather than a cartoon. This is where her transformation happens, where she abandons humanity for monstrosity. Children might marvel at the bubbling smoke. Adults see a descent into obsession so total it feels disturbingly real. Underlying misogyny. Kids never think twice about the female roles in Snow White. Adults, however, notice the stark divide. Women in this film are either saintly and innocent, like Snow White, or vain and cruel, like the Queen. There's no middle ground, no complexity, just extremes. Snow White is portrayed as submissive, sweet, and endlessly forgiving. She's rewarded for her passivity and her domestic skills. Meanwhile, the Queen is powerful, independent, and ambitious, and she's punished brutally for it. Adults recognize the double message. Good women serve, bad women lead. This mirrors the cultural climate of the 1930s, when women were often praised for homemaking and demonized for ambition. In fact, the Queen's qualities, confidence, intelligence, and self-determination could have made her a brilliant ruler. But the story twists those traits into monstrous flaws. For adults, it's hard to ignore the implication. Women who want power are dangerous, while women who embrace domesticity are virtuous. It's not a balanced story, it's a morality play built on gender stereotypes. Snow White's eternal innocence. Snow White isn't just portrayed as kind, she's framed as eternally childlike. Adults pick up on her high, sing-song voice, her round eyes, and her innocence that borders on naivety. She never questions the Queen, never doubts strangers, and never sees danger until it's too late. Children admire her sweetness. Adults notice how unrealistic it feels. No one is this innocent without consequences, and in Snow White's case, it almost gets her killed. Her eternal optimism isn't portrayed as strength, but as helplessness. In many ways, Snow White's innocence is both her greatest trait and her fatal flaw. Adults recognize the contradiction. The very quality that makes her beloved is the reason she's so vulnerable. She trusts the dwarfs instantly. She accepts the apple without hesitation. She never once imagines that someone could lie to her. It's a character design that reflects 1930s ideals of femininity, pure, unquestioning, and gentle. Adults see the trap. Innocence might look beautiful, but in reality, it leaves her powerless in a world full of predators. The magic mirror's voice. As a child, the magic mirror is simply cool, a talking face that knows everything. Adults hear something else, authority. The mirror speaks in a deep, commanding male voice, delivering judgments about beauty and worth as if they're facts carved in stone. The Queen never questions it. She accepts the mirror's word as absolute truth. Adults notice the symbolism. A woman's value is determined not by her own confidence, but by an external, patriarchal voice. The Queen's obsession with fairest of them all is fueled by a male presence dictating who qualifies. This detail changes the dynamic. The Queen isn't just vain, she's trapped by a system that tells her she's worthless the moment someone else surpasses her. Adults watching today can't ignore the way authority and beauty are framed. The mirror doesn't encourage, it condemns. It isn't guidance, it's judgment. For kids, it's a neat special effect. For adults, it's a chilling reminder of how outside voices shape self-image. Near horror film elements. Rewatch Snow White as an adult, and you realize you're not just watching a fairy tale. You're watching pieces of a horror film slipped into animation. The storm sequence at the end plays like Gothic cinema. The Queen's cackle echoes like a villain in a Universal monster movie. The vultures, the shadows, even the hag's makeup all feel lifted from horror imagery. Disney wasn't playing it safe. He embraced fear as a storytelling tool. Adults see this now. The way lightning illuminates jagged rocks. The way the Queen stalks Snow White like a slasher villain. The way the forest itself seems haunted. These aren't cartoon scares. They're techniques used in live-action thrillers. It's why adults still feel uneasy watching it. Snow White may sing to birds, but the film itself dances with shadows. Children giggle nervously. Adults realize Disney essentially made a gothic horror movie disguised as a cartoon. And the gamble worked. It terrified and fascinated audiences all at once. Historical context. Kids don't think about history when they watch Snow White. Adults do. Released in 1937, this movie came out during the tail end of the Great Depression. Families were struggling, jobs were scarce, and escapism was desperately needed. Adults recognize how the film reflects its era. The dwarfs' endless labor mirrored the grinding work many endured. The Queen's obsession with beauty echoed Hollywood's growing influence on image and glamour. And Snow White's cheerful domesticity reassured audiences that happiness could still be found in simple virtues. What's more, Disney poured unprecedented money and manpower into this project. Critics called it Disney's folly, convinced no one would sit through a feature-length cartoon, but the gamble paid off. Adults today see the film not just as a story, but as a milestone, a risk that changed cinema forever. Snow White isn't just a fairy tale princess. She's the face of a cultural revolution born in one of America's darkest economic moments. And adults watching now can't help but feel the weight of that history behind every glittering scene. So there you have it. 25 things hiding in plain sight that only adults pick up on in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. From gothic terror to cultural stereotypes, this innocent fairy tale is far more complicated than we ever realized as kids. Which of these details surprised you most? Drop your thoughts below, and if you love this dive into Disney's first classic, hit like, share, and subscribe. After all, what other childhood favorites might have secrets waiting?